When 13-year-old Maya Carter steps through the gates of Ivywood Academy, she dreams of excelling in the hallowed halls of opportunity her mother, Danielle, worked tirelessly to provide. But beneath the ivy-covered facade lies an unspoken hierarchy, and Maya soon becomes the target of a revered teacher whose sharp words and subtle humiliations begin to erode her confidence. Danielle, a trailblazing tech entrepreneur who fought against every barrier to succeed, senses something is wrong. When Maya's hidden struggles finally come to light, Danielle is furious and determined to protect her daughter's dignity. But as she pulls back the curtain on Ivywood's elite reputation, she discovers a web of systemic bias that runs far deeper than one teacher's prejudice. Armed with her unyielding resolve and the support of a civil rights attorney, Danielle launches a fight not only for Maya but for every marginalized student at Ivywood. Her crusade ignites a wave of truth, exposing hidden wounds and forcing painful reckonings. But as she uncovers a startling twist about the very man who hurt her daughter, Danielle must choose between dismantling a flawed system and seeking a path to redemption, for Ivywood, for her family, and even for herself. In this powerful story of resilience, justice, and generational change, one mother and daughter's courage will light the way for a brighter future. How far would you go to protect the ones you love? And what would you sacrifice to ensure the world finally sees them? The towering wrought iron gates of Ivywood Academy gleamed in the early morning sun, a symbol of prestige and opportunity. Maya Carter stood in awe, clutching her backpack straps, as her mother, Danielle, parked their car nearby. The school looked like something out of a movie. Ivy-covered walls, sprawling gardens, and groups of students in pristine uniforms chatting like they owned the place. Danielle placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. "You ready for this?" Her voice was warm but steady, a subtle encouragement. Maya nodded, though her stomach churned with nerves. "Yeah, I think so. You don't just belong here, Maya," Danielle said, crouching slightly to meet her daughter's eyes. "You're going to thrive here. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Maya smiled weakly. "I'll try." "You won't try. You will." Danielle's words were firm but loving. "You've got this." As they walked through the gates together, Maya couldn't help but feel small among the groups of confident students. Her mother's reassuring presence was a comforting anchor, but as Danielle kissed her on the forehead and waved goodbye, the reality of being alone in this new world settled in. Maya's first class was English literature, and the room was as grand as the rest of the school. Polished wood desks, large windows overlooking the gardens, and shelves lined with classic novels. The teacher, Mr. Bradford, stood at the front. He was tall and imposing, with graying hair slicked back and a tailored suit that screamed authority. "Welcome, class," he said, his voice sharp and measured. "Let's begin by introducing ourselves. Tell us your name and what you hope to gain from this course." As each student spoke, Maya rehearsed her introduction in her head. When her turn came, she stood, her voice wavering slightly. "Hi, I'm Maya Carter and I hope to become a better writer." Mr. Bradford nodded curtly. "Very well. Next." Maya sat down, her cheeks burning. No acknowledgement, no encouragement, just a dismissal. She glanced around, noticing how other students were greeted with a small smile or a nod of approval. Was it just her, or was Mr. Bradford's indifference deliberate? Lunchtime brought a new set of challenges. The cafeteria buzzed with chatter as students filled tables in tight-knit groups. Maya scanned the room, clutching her lunch tray, hoping to find a friendly face. But the cliques seemed impenetrable, designer bags on every chair, inside jokes flying across the tables. She spotted an open seat and hesitated. "Is this taken?" she asked softly. The girls at the table exchanged glances before one of them shrugged. "Go ahead," the girl said, her tone polite but dismissive. Maya sat down, trying to join the conversation, but her comments were met with lukewarm responses. Eventually, the group shifted their focus entirely, leaving her out. She finished her lunch in silence, her confidence sinking. In the afternoon, Maya returned to Mr. Bradford's class. The lesson was on analyzing a poem, and Maya, eager to participate, raised her hand. "Yes, Emily," Mr. Bradford called, choosing a confident blonde girl seated across the room. Maya's hand lowered slowly. She watched as Emily gave her answer, receiving a nod of approval. Moments later, Maya raised her hand again. This time, Mr. Bradford's sharp eyes landed on her. "Maya," he said, his tone flat. "Do you have something to add?" Maya took a deep breath and shared her interpretation, hoping to impress. But Mr. Bradford's lips curled into a faint, almost patronizing smile. "Interesting," he said, though a bit simplistic. "Let's move on." A few students stifled chuckles. Maya felt her face flush as she sank back in her seat, her enthusiasm evaporating. That evening, Maya sat at the kitchen table, poking at her dinner. Danielle, busy preparing a cup of tea, noticed the quiet. "How was your first day, sweetheart?" Maya forced a smile. "It was fine." Danielle sat across from her, studying her daughter's face. "Fine? That's not the most convincing answer." Maya shrugged, her eyes fixed on her plate. "It's just different." Danielle reached across the table, placing her hand over Maya's. "Maya, it's okay to feel out of place at first, but if something's bothering you, you can tell me." Maya hesitated, swallowing the lump in her throat. I don't know if I belong there. Everyone's so confident. And the teachers, they don't even seem to notice me." Danielle's brow furrowed, a mix of concern and quiet anger flashing across her face. "Maya, listen to me. You belong there just as much as anyone else. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Maya nodded, though tears pricked her eyes. She didn't want to disappoint her mother, not after all Danielle had done to get her into Ivywood. But as she climbed into bed that night, the weight of the day pressed down on her. She hoped tomorrow would be different, but deep down, she wasn't sure how much more she could take. The chemistry lab buzzed with the hum of students measuring liquids and meticulously following instructions. Maya stood at her station, carefully pouring a bright blue solution into a beaker. She could feel Mr. Bradford's sharp gaze on her. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice cutting through the din. "Careful. This isn't the kind of task you want to botch." Maya's hands trembled slightly as she picked up the next beaker. She wanted to prove herself, to show him and everyone else that she could handle this. But as she poured, a few drops spilled onto the counter. The room fell silent. Mr. Bradford smirked, addressing the class rather than Maya. "See? Precision matters. Not everyone is suited for this kind of work." The snickers that followed felt like daggers to Maya. She quickly cleaned the spill, her cheeks burning. She wanted to sink into the floor, but she kept her head down, refusing to let the tears fall. Later that week, Maya was paired with 3 classmates for a history project. As they gathered around a table in the library, Maya tried to contribute. "I can handle the research for our timeline," she offered, her voice tentative. "Sure," said Emily, barely looking up. "I'll handle the presentation since I'm better at speaking." The others nodded in agreement, not bothering to divide the work further. Maya ended up doing most of the research, spending hours in the library while the others texted each other about unrelated topics. On presentation day, Emily stood confidently at the front of the class, delivering the work Maya had painstakingly compiled. When Mr. Bradford praised the group for their thorough research, he didn't once glance in Maya's direction. "Well done, Emily," he said with a nod. "A strong leader makes all the difference." Maya's stomach twisted, but she said nothing. She wanted to scream that it was her research, her effort, but the words stuck in her throat. After school, Maya trudged home, her head bowed low. The golden afternoon light seemed to mock her, bright and warm, while she felt nothing but cold and alone. She replayed the events of the day in her mind. The laughter in the chemistry lab, the praise Emily had taken credit for. "I don't belong there," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the rustle of leaves in the breeze. She passed other students walking in groups, their laughter echoing around her. It felt like she was invisible, a ghost moving through the edges of a world she didn't fit into. That evening, Maya sat silently at the dinner table, pushing her food around her plate. Danielle, always quick to notice her daughter's moods, set her fork down. "Maya, what's wrong?" "Nothing," Maya mumbled. Danielle reached across the table, her hand gently touching Maya's. "Sweetheart, talk to me. You've been so quiet this week." Maya's eyes filled with tears. It's hard. The teachers, the kids, I don't think I belong at Ivywood. Danielle's expression darkened, a mix of concern and anger. What do you mean? Did something happen? Maya hesitated. Then the words spilled out. She told her mother about the chemistry lab, the group project, and how Mr. Bradford treated her. As she spoke, the tears flowed freely, and Danielle's grip on her hand tightened. He makes me feel so small, Maya whispered. And I don't know why. Danielle's jaw clenched. Maya, listen to me. This isn't about you. It's about him. And I'm not going to let anyone, especially not a teacher, make you feel this way. After Maya went to bed, Danielle sat at the kitchen table, her phone in hand. Her thoughts raced as she remembered her own struggles growing up, the times she'd been underestimated, dismissed, and belittled. She had vowed Maya wouldn't face the same battles, but here they were. She dialed Simone Turner, her longtime friend and a civil rights attorney. Simone answered after the second ring. Danielle, what's going on? Simone's voice was warm but immediately attentive. I need your help, Danielle said. She explained everything Maya had told her, her voice steady but laced with anger. Simone listened carefully. That's unacceptable, she said when Danielle finished. But if you're going to confront the school, you'll need more than your word against his. I'm not letting this slide, Simone. I don't care what it takes. Good, Simone said firmly. Start documenting everything, every slight, every comment, and talk to other parents. If this is a pattern, you're not the only one dealing with it. As Danielle hung up, she felt a spark of determination flare inside her. This wasn't just about Maya. This was about every child who had ever been made to feel less than. And Danielle Carter wasn't going to stand by and let it happen. Danielle sat in the cozy living room of a fellow Ivywood parent, her notebook balanced on her lap. The room was filled with a mix of nervous energy and cautious hope as other parents exchanged hushed conversations. Most were parents of students who, like Maya, felt the sting of Mr. Bradford's words or Ivywood's unspoken divides. I never thought someone else was experiencing this, said Maria, a Latina mother sitting across from Danielle. My son told me about the way Mr. Bradford talks to him, but I thought it was just because he's shy. Danielle nodded, her expression both empathetic and resolute. It's not just your son. Maya's been going through the same thing. And from what I've heard, there are others. A father, Marcus, leaned forward. But what can we do? Mr. Bradford's been at Ivywood for years. He's practically untouchable. Danielle's voice was firm. We start by documenting everything. If we can gather enough stories, enough proof, they can't ignore us. Simone, seated beside Danielle, chimed in. And if they do ignore us, we have other avenues, legal ones. The parents exchanged glances, some nodding, others hesitant. But as the evening wore on, one by one, they began to share their stories. Danielle jotted down notes, her determination growing with every word. The next morning, Danielle met Simone at her office. The small space was lined with legal books and a whiteboard filled with notes from other cases. Simone poured them both a cup of coffee and set a stack of papers on the desk between them. I've started drafting a formal complaint, Simone said, but we're going to need more than just testimonials. We need hard evidence. Danielle sipped her coffee, her mind racing. How do we get that? Most of this is verbal, subtle. There's no paper trail. Simone leaned back, thoughtful. Sometimes it's about patterns. If Mr. Bradford's behavior follows a recognizable pattern, we can use that to strengthen our case. And if we can find anything in Ivywood's policies that allows this kind of bias to go unchecked, we've got leverage. Danielle nodded. I'll keep talking to parents, see if we can find more incidents. There has to be something. Danielle, Simone said, her tone softer now. This isn't going to be easy. Ivywood is a fortress. They'll protect their own. I know, Danielle said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned with resolve. But I'm not backing down. Later that week, Danielle waited outside Ivywood's main building, her heels clicking against the stone pathway. When Mr. Bradford emerged, his briefcase in hand, she stepped into his path. Mr. Bradford, she said, her tone sharp but controlled. He stopped, raising an eyebrow. Mrs. Carter, to what do I owe the pleasure? I want to talk about my daughter, Maya, Danielle said. She's been feeling targeted in your class. Targeted? He repeated, his expression incredulous. I treat all my students the same. Danielle folded her arms. Do you? Because from what Maya's told me, it sounds like you go out of your way to humiliate her. His face tightened, but his tone remained calm. Mrs. Carter, I expect a certain standard from all my students. If Maya feels she's being treated unfairly, perhaps it's because she's not meeting that standard. Danielle took a step closer. Maya works harder than most of the kids in that class. You don't get to dismiss her efforts because of your own biases. Mr. Bradford's eyes narrowed. I suggest you take this up with the administration if you have concerns. Oh, I will, Danielle said, her voice low and dangerous. But don't think for a second that I won't hold you accountable. He gave her a curt nod and walked away, but Danielle didn't miss the flicker of discomfort in his eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough to tell her she was on the right track. 2 days later, Danielle found herself sitting in a polished conference room across from Evelyn Radcliffe, the head of Ivywood School Board. The room was intimidating, with its long mahogany table and walls lined with awards and certificates. But Danielle refused to let it rattle her. Mrs. Carter, Evelyn began, her tone polite but distant. I understand you have concerns about one of our teachers. Yes, Danielle said. Mr. Bradford has been targeting my daughter and other students in his class. His behavior is unacceptable. Evelyn nodded slowly. We take these allegations seriously. But Mr. Bradford has been a respected member of our faculty for over 2 decades. Do you have evidence to support your claims? Danielle slid a folder across the table. These are testimonials from other parents and students. They all describe the same pattern of behavior. Evelyn glanced at the papers, but didn't pick them up. We will, of course, review this. However, it's important to remember that Mr. Bradford has an exemplary record. We must be cautious about making accusations without concrete proof. Danielle's frustration bubbled to the surface. And what about the students? Are their voices not proof enough? Evelyn's expression didn't waver. We will investigate, Mrs. Carter. But these things take time. Danielle stood, her chair scraping against the floor. You have your time, Mrs. Radcliffe. But know this, I won't stop until something changes. That evening, Danielle sat in her living room, the folder of testimonials spread out before her. Maya joined her, sitting quietly on the couch. Did you talk to the school? Maya asked hesitantly. I did, Danielle said, her tone firm. They're going to investigate, but I'm not holding my breath. Maya looked down. Maybe we should just let it go. Danielle reached over, taking Maya's hand. No, Maya, this isn't just about you. It's about every student who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong. We're not letting this go. Maya nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. Thank you, Mom. Danielle smiled softly. Always, sweetheart. Always. As Maya went to bed, Danielle picked up her phone and called Simone. We're going public, she said. They want proof? We'll give them more than they can handle. Simone's voice was steady on the other end. Let's do it. Danielle sat across from Simone in the lawyer's compact office, the faint hum of the city outside the only background noise. Between them lay a pile of papers, affidavits, parent testimonials, and photographs of Ivywood's gleaming facade. A laptop screen displayed the draft of an article. This is going live tonight, Simone said, scrolling through the piece. The reporter's done their homework. Once this hits, the school will feel the pressure. Danielle leaned forward, her expression resolute. They need to. They've brushed off our concerns for too long. Simone's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and smiled. It's the reporter. Give me a second. As Simone stepped out to take the call, Danielle's mind raced. She thought of Maya, her bright, curious daughter who had once walked into Ivywood full of hope. She glanced at her phone and opened a photo of Maya from her first day at school, standing by the gates with a nervous smile. Simone returned, her expression triumphant. It's scheduled for 8. Brace yourself, Danielle. Things are about to get loud. By the next afternoon, the article had gone viral. Parents flooded the comments section with their own stories, sharing experiences of exclusion and microaggressions their children had faced at Ivywood. The piece painted a damning picture of the school's culture, and a spotlight fell squarely on Mr. Bradford. Later that day, Danielle sat in her living room, scrolling through the responses when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but she answered. "Mrs. Carter?" came a tentative male voice. "This is she. Who's calling?" "This is Richard Bell." I went to school with Edward Bradford." Danielle straightened. "Go on." "He and I were among the only scholarship students at our high school. I read the article and, well, you need to know something. What he's doing now, it's wrong. But it's coming from somewhere." Danielle listened intently as Richard recounted their youth. Bradford had been ridiculed by wealthier peers, excluded from clubs, and dismissed by teachers who saw him as a charity case. Over time, he'd adopted a cold, defensive demeanor to shield himself. He clawed his way up, but it hardened him, Richard finished. "It's no excuse, but maybe it explains why he's the way he is." Danielle sat in silence for a moment. "Thank you for telling me this." After hanging up, she stared out the window. She felt a mix of emotions: anger for Maya, understanding for Bradford, and a growing sense of how deeply Ivywood's culture affected everyone. Word of the article reached Ivywood, and in an attempt to control the narrative, the administration organized a town hall. Parents, teachers, and students packed the auditorium. Tension hung thick in the air. Danielle sat near the front, flanked by Simone and a group of supportive parents. Evelyn Radcliffe, poised and polished, opened the meeting. "We are here to listen," Evelyn said, her voice calm. Ivywood has always prided itself on excellence and inclusivity. If there are concerns, we want to address them. Danielle stood, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "You've had these concerns for weeks, Mrs. Radcliffe, and you've done nothing." A ripple of agreement swept through the crowd. Another parent stood. "My son was repeatedly ignored in Mr. Bradford's class. I brought it up months ago, but nothing changed." One by one, parents shared their stories. Some students bravely spoke, describing subtle but persistent acts of bias. As the accounts piled up, Evelyn's composure began to falter. Finally, Danielle spoke again. "This isn't just about one teacher. It's about a culture that allows this behavior to persist. Ivywood needs more than apologies. It needs change." The room erupted in applause. The following week, whispers of division within Ivywood's administration began to surface. Danielle received a call from a faculty member who wished to remain anonymous. "There are people here who want change," the voice said. "But others, people with power, they want to bury this." Danielle's stomach twisted. The school's reluctance to act wasn't just fear. It was self-preservation. That evening, she met with Simone at her office. "They're stalling," Danielle said, "and I'm worried they're going to sweep this under the rug." Simone nodded. "They might try, but we've got momentum. Keep the pressure on." Danielle leaned back, her mind racing. The fight was far from over, but she felt the tide beginning to turn. If Ivywood thought they could silence her, they were wrong. 2 weeks later, Ivywood announced an official investigation into Mr. Bradford's conduct and the school's policies. A public statement promised transparency and accountability. Danielle sat in her kitchen, reading the announcement on her laptop. Maya sat across from her, a hopeful smile on her face. "Does this mean it's going to get better?" Maya asked. Danielle reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand. "It's a start, but we're not done yet." As she closed the laptop, Danielle felt a surge of determination. The fight for justice was never easy, but she wouldn't stop until Ivywood became a place where every student could thrive. Simone sat across from Danielle in her home office, surrounded by a mountain of documents. Red ink annotations marked key pieces of evidence, emails, parent testimonials, and even Ivywood's student conduct policies. "This isn't just about Bradford," Simone said, her voice edged with determination. "There's a systemic pattern here. Hiring practices, disciplinary records. Everything shows bias." Danielle leaned forward, scanning one of the documents. "So this isn't just a case of one bad teacher." "No," Simone replied. "It's a culture, and that's what we'll target." The phone buzzed between them. Simone answered, her face growing serious. She nodded a few times before hanging up. "That was the investigator the board hired. They're willing to meet with us privately to discuss what they've found so far. Danielle's eyebrows lifted. Is that good or bad? Simone smirked. It means they're scared. The private meeting was held in a quiet room at Ivywood Academy. Danielle and Simone sat across from Evelyn Radcliffe and another member of the board, a stoic man named Mr. Carter. The air was tense. Evelyn folded her hands on the table. After a thorough review, we've decided to place Mr. Bradford on administrative leave while we finalize the investigation. Danielle's jaw tightened. Administrative leave? That's hardly accountability. Evelyn's calm demeanor cracked slightly. Mrs. Carter, we have policies to follow. Policies that allow teachers like him to abuse their power. Danielle interrupted. This isn't just about Maya. It's about the dozens of children who've been affected. Mr. Carter cleared his throat. The board is considering additional measures, including mandatory training for faculty and policy revisions. Danielle stood, her voice unwavering. Consider all you want. But know this, if I don't see real change, I'll take this public again. As they left, Simone turned to Danielle. You handled that perfectly. Danielle shook her head. It's not enough. Not yet. 2 weeks later, Ivywood announced a new anti-discrimination policy, accompanied by mandatory training sessions for all staff. Danielle attended one of the sessions as an observer, her sharp eyes taking in the reactions of the teachers. Some sat attentively, nodding along to the presenter's points. Others, including a visibly uncomfortable Mr. Bradford, remained rigid, their expressions unreadable. After the session, Danielle approached the facilitator. How do you plan to ensure this training isn't just a box-ticking exercise? The facilitator, a young woman with a calm but firm demeanor, replied, We're implementing regular assessments and anonymous feedback channels. This is just the beginning. Danielle nodded, her skepticism tempered by cautious hope. I'll be watching. In the weeks that followed, Maya began to reclaim her confidence. Danielle watched as her daughter, once hesitant and withdrawn, started participating more in class and engaging with her peers. One evening, Maya bounded into the kitchen, her face alight with excitement. Mom, guess what? I got chosen to present my science project at the school fair. Danielle smiled, pulling Maya into a hug. That's amazing, sweetheart. What's your project about? It's about sustainable energy solutions, Maya said, her voice brimming with enthusiasm. I'm even using some of the stuff you've talked about at your company. Danielle's chest swelled with pride. You're going to be incredible. As Maya chattered on about her project, Danielle felt a flicker of hope. Change was slow, but it was happening. One evening, Danielle and Maya sat together on the couch, flipping through a scrapbook Maya had made for a school assignment. It was filled with photos, drawings, and captions about her life. This is from my first day at Ivywood, Maya said, pointing to a photo of her standing by the school gates. I was so nervous. Danielle nodded, her throat tightening. You've come so far since then. Because of you, Maya said softly. You fought for me. Danielle smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. I'll always fight for you, Maya. Always. As they sat together, Danielle felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time, she believed they were on the right path. The hall was packed with reporters, parents, and students. The Ivywood Academy crest loomed large behind a polished podium where Evelyn Radcliffe and other board members sat stiffly. Danielle stood in the audience, Maya by her side. Evelyn approached the microphone. After a thorough investigation, the board has decided to accept Mr. Bradford's resignation effective immediately. Additionally, we are implementing new anti-discrimination policies and expanding our diversity training for staff. The room buzzed with murmurs as reporters furiously typed on laptops. Danielle exchanged a glance with Simone, who nodded in quiet approval. Now, Evelyn said, clearing her throat, we'd like to invite Danielle Carter to speak. Danielle walked to the podium, her heels clicking against the wooden floor. The room fell silent as she adjusted the microphone. She scanned the audience, her gaze settling on Maya for a moment before speaking. Thank you, she began. Today is a step in the right direction, but let's be clear. This isn't the end. It's the beginning. Ivywood Academy has a responsibility to ensure every child feels valued and respected. We owe it to our children to create a better environment, one that fosters inclusion and empathy. Her voice strengthened. This fight was never just about one teacher or one student. It's about dismantling a culture that allows prejudice to go unchecked. I'll continue to hold Ivywood accountable, not just for Maya but for every student walking these halls. The crowd erupted into applause. Maya beamed as Danielle returned to her seat, squeezing her hand. A few days after the press conference, Danielle received an unexpected email. It was from Mr. Bradford, requesting a private meeting. Despite her reservations, she agreed, curiosity outweighing her anger. They met in a quiet cafe. Mr. Bradford looked older than she remembered, the weight of the past weeks etched into his face. "Mrs. Carter," he began, his voice subdued. "Thank you for meeting me." Danielle nodded, her expression guarded. "What do you want, Mr. Bradford?" "I wanted to apologize," he said, his hands clasped tightly. "Not just to Maya, but to you as well. I've spent a lot of time reflecting, and I realize now how much harm I caused." Danielle studied him, searching for sincerity. "Why now?" He sighed, his shoulders slumping. "When I was young, I was the one who didn't belong. I thought that if I conformed, if I proved I was better than the standard set for me, I'd finally be accepted. But instead, I became the very person who once made me feel small." His voice broke. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to do better. If there's a way I can help undo the damage I've caused, I'm willing." Danielle leaned back, her expression softening. "Actions speak louder than words, Mr. Bradford. If you truly want to make amends, there's work to be done." The changes at Ivywood began gradually but visibly. New teachers from diverse backgrounds joined the faculty. Mandatory diversity workshops became a part of the curriculum, not just for staff but for students as well. Danielle walked through the halls one day, watching as students collaborated on a mural celebrating unity. Maya, paintbrush in hand, was laughing with a group of classmates. Evelyn Radcliffe approached Danielle, her demeanor less stiff than usual. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "I wanted to thank you. None of this would have happened without your persistence." Danielle nodded. "It shouldn't have taken this much, but I appreciate the progress. Let's hope it lasts." "It will," Evelyn said firmly. "We're committed to it." For the first time, Danielle believed her. That evening, Danielle sat on her porch, a glass of tea in hand. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, a peaceful contrast to the storm she'd weathered over the past months. Maya joined her, holding a notebook. "I'm working on a speech for the school assembly," she said, sitting beside her mother. Danielle smiled. "What's it about?" "Resilience," Maya said, "and how standing up for yourself can make a difference. Kind of like you did for me." Danielle's eyes welled with tears. "You're going to do amazing, Maya. I'm so proud of you." Maya rested her head on her mother's shoulder. "I couldn't have done it without you." The assembly hall was filled with students, teachers, and parents. Maya stood on stage, her voice confident as she delivered her speech. "This school taught me a lot, not just about academics but about standing up for what's right," she said. "I've learned that change starts when we refuse to stay silent, and I'm proud to be part of that change." The room erupted into applause as Maya stepped down, her classmates cheering. Danielle watched from the back, her heart swelling with pride. As they walked out together, Maya turned to her mother. "We did it." Danielle smiled. "Yes, we did. And we'll keep doing it." Together, they left Ivywood, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.